do a special edition here of Tobie and I rambling. We talked earlier about Vampire and his D&D Paladin character, and I had so many questions about how you see D&D, Tobie, that we didn't get to, that I would love your input.
Fire away.
You're soft coming in right now.
Oh, sorry. Is it choppy?
No, it was just really soft. I couldn't hear you very well.
Oh, okay.
So,
There. I'm holding the mic close again.
um, so we were talking about the sweet spot in D&D at fifth level and whatnot. And
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering what, in your opinion, let's say we sat down. I sat down with you and Adrian, Jeanette, and Ina and Titus, and we started playing D&D on Discord, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're making your first character. Do you see any problem with us just making fifth level characters and hardly ever progressing throughout the story? That you're just stuck at fifth level. What's your
Me,
feelings on that?
I'm fine with that. I've always been. I don't know. I guess I've never really been attached to progression, except for my early years in the 90s and the early 2000s. Back then, it was really I want to get these powers. I want to do this and that. Especially with
Right.
White Wolf, when they started revealing there were powers for disciplines at level six
Right.
and higher. I
Yeah.
mean, oh, that was so evil. And you're like, what? I can't really talk to minds until I reach this level. And that just made us all diablerie whores. Um,
Yeah.
but with the way I understand gaming now, I don't see progression as important as I used to, except for when the games expect it to be part of the narrative. So, for example, um, I would not like that if it was something similar to the Great Pendragon campaign. If you're gonna play generations of people, then I want to
Sure.
feel I'm growing, and I
Yeah.
want to
Yeah. Yeah.
feel I have reached this peak, but now my stats are declining because I'm too old. And Pendragon beautifully does that. So for Dungeons and Dragons, if we were to have that and we're at fifth level and we're stuck at fifth level the whole time, I don't mind as long as I'm not playing a generation. Meaning, if I'm gonna have a character be 20, 30 years older, then it kind of feels weird if I never change.
No, no, absolutely. I agree with you. Um, my point, I guess, for me, when I'm asking this question, I'm thinking along the lines of, well, D&D is combat based. It's pretty heavily baked into the system
Yes.
that you're going to get into fights. And if
Yes.
you're not progressing and you're playing the same character, let's say fifth level for 10 sessions, I'm just picking a number, you're going to get kind of bored
Mm-hmm.
with you're rolling the same thing. It's one of the reasons I don't like superhero games is you're always going to use your best power when you're a
Yeah.
superhero. You're always going to use whatever does the most damage. And you're going to do the same thing with D&D. And if you're doing it for too many sessions in a row where it's the same attack with the same weapon dealing the same damage, when does that get stale?
Mm-hmm. I've I've encountered that worry in many superhero games I've run as well. Wherein, you know, a player might be like, um, they start out as a tech hero, so their powers are armor and energy blasts, and then
Right.
during the game they're like, oh, can I start developing a super speed like power? And I'm like, sure, the system allows it. It's something new you built up. But then during play, they realize, but my super speed's only at 20 and my blast is at 50. Why will I use that 20?
Right.
And I realized the only way it made sense to make the players feel it was still vital was that I had to rig up incidents where speed was the only way to do it, or
Right.
the blasts were not as effective. So now they had to be creative. Or um, we were playing DC Heroes back then, and DC Heroes sort of had that. I forgot the name of the rule where you can like combine powers for that moment, and it's a temporary, it becomes this new power that you get to use. So like it's if you use super speed to create air control, or if you use that sort of thing. So I sort of had to use that to make sure that they could still feel the relevance of their other power. So it was still kind of tricky.
Right.
When you say no progression though, do you mean just the character development, or does that include no new items, no new
I'm just
artifacts that
talking
give you boost?
mechanically, right? You can probably find items and spells and that sort of thing because that's built into the story. But I'm talking about you just get rid of XP, and you're just a fifth level character, and we're not focused on worrying about because XP is the reward, right? It's the chaser.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever your reward system, and a lot of people don't realize this, and I think that maybe half the designers in the gaming industry don't understand this. That whatever your reward system is, that's what people are going to chase when they're playing. So since XP is based on how many monsters you kill, D&D is played in such a way that you're just chasing monsters. And if
I,
the
I
reward system was different, people would play it different.
I think it's less the reward system for me. I think it's more um, what is your dice roll resolution mechanic intended to portray? If your resolution mechanic is portraying the success of the character's actions, then progression becomes innately desired because I want to roll better. And since the dice determine if I hit, then I need bonuses to make the dice roll better. But if your dice mechanic is more narrative, like in Praxis, wherein it's not about how good you do it, it's about whether the story does move in that direction, then
Right.
progression becomes irrelevant.
Right.
And that's what I've noticed with some other game systems as well, other than Praxis, where, like, I know you hate it, but Fiasco, for example, um, the dice rolls are used to generate the story, but then later on, it's really more the other players choosing if it's the black or white die, and that makes progression is irrelevant in that sort of a mechanic, unless you really jury rig your progression to be now you can say no to the dice that's chosen, but that just messes it all up. And I think inherently, since most games do approach the dice as the do you succeed or not, it's hard to fault people for wanting progression.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think I'm necessarily faulting anyone, but it was curious to me when we were talking about your first
Mm-hmm.
character, how you were playing it the way a young person would, right? You're chasing this story, but also chasing XP, and you want more power, and you want more magic items, and you want to get up in level because the challenges are going to grow. But you
Yeah.
and I are designers, and we know that the math grows on both sides of the screen.
Mm-hmm.
So at the end of the day, there's a sweet spot in D&D, but eventually the sweet spot dies because it just becomes math. When you're 18th level and you're fighting a 50th level dragon, your bonuses are offset by the dragon's AC.
Yeah.
So you might as well be fifth level again fighting a dragon who has right a plus 10 AC instead of the plus 50 AC.
Yeah. And I think that's a truth that it's a truth that most gamers only realize when they try to make their own game,
Right.
or for those who actually tried playing MMORPGs, which uses the same
Yeah.
philosophy in terms
Exactly.
of when you leave the city, you have the lower level monsters, you get your bonuses, but then as you progress outside from the city, oh, stronger monsters because you
Right.
have better stats.
Right.
So it's like you're fighting the same slime.
Right. And that's because all of those encounters are doing the same exact thing. You're not encountering the encounter and then making choices about what is the meaningful options I can have here. What's the fork in the road of
Yeah.
encountering this troll? Your only choice is to fight the troll.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you want progression on a specific chart, a specific linear trail. And yeah, I think it just limits what you can do with the game. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think we're sort of beating a dead horse at this point. I think we agree on this. It's just how do we get there? And a lot of people, by the way, to get back to an earlier point, a lot of people aren't playing Pendragon the way you're playing it for 75 years.
Mm-hmm.
And most people are playing 6 session campaigns nowadays. They just can't get together all the time,
Yeah.
right? And
And it's
if they're below a certain age, I don't even know what kind of gaming they're doing because I don't interact with people of that age. Not because I don't want to, it's just we don't have the same circles.
yeah.
And so how am I supposed to find a group of 25-year-olds who are playing D&D and get a sense, take the temperature of how they're playing,
Mm-hmm.
of what their approaches are? Because I think their approaches at 25 are much different than my approaches were at 25.
And the approach isn't even just limited to whether it's go for the progress or go for the story. It's also in terms of what type of story you'd like to tell. So I've introduced a group of my office mates who haven't gamed at all to Dungeon World, only because we have another office mate who runs Dungeons and Dragons, and personally, I'm tired of running Dungeons and Dragons after running it for so long in the past. So I told that friend of mine, you can run the D&D games to let our office mates get to try it. I'll get you guys to try new systems. And I started with Dungeon World simply because I was thinking it was close enough to what they were used to.
Mm-hmm.
So we prepped, we set up. It was just the last Wednesday when we had our session. And I was asking them, what sort of game are you guys expecting? Are we looking at something like Lord of the Rings, where it's, almost realistic, but with some comic moments? Are we looking at something closer to Avatar, The Last Airbender, wherein, it feels comical, even if there's a serious undertone? Are we looking at just making this crazy, like, I don't know, Order of the Stick or something like that? And most of them were like saying, oh, they like to have the drama, they like to have exciting things and that. But then as we played, it started to feel like Muppets Go on an Adventure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was fun. We were having a great time. But I definitely found myself chuckling at the thought that, none of this connected with the earlier discussions of the mood they were aiming for. But I still just went with it, and we had a great time going through the scenes where one of them was this halfling barbarian who was picking people up because he could. The other one was this bard who was an orc, and chose singing as their instrument. So um, the character was basically doing medieval Britney Spears songs in order to help the battle and stuff like that. And it just shows you that when people jump into a game, they have certain approaches or expectations, which either others just jive along, or maybe it's also what they're expecting to do because that's what they see from media. They're watching different actual play games, and they see that's how kooky it gets, so they do it that way too.
Right.
And it's
I
later on that people try to tell more serious stories.
I'm gonna say the thing that everybody hates when I give this kind of feedback, right? And this is a bit negative, and I don't really like to get like this on the podcast, but Powered by the Apocalypse, and especially a game like Dungeon World, which I do not like, and that's okay that I don't like it. You're allowed to
Mhm.
enjoy it. But the
Mhm.
thing, and I'm saying that to everybody listening, the problem with PBTA is it makes the player stupid. And I'm going to qualify and explain that comment. The game allows you to do whatever you want up until the point the game master says time to roll the dice. People
Mhm.
like to roll dice. People
Mhm.
want to see what chance has in store for them. So
Mhm.
they do dumber and dumber and dumber and dumber things so they can engage those charts. The charts are there. There's no limit to the amount of times you can roll in a session, right?
Mhm.
So you pick up the dice and you just do bigger and bigger and wackier things. The game's reward system is to be silly. So even if somebody comes into Dungeon World, and I've seen so many people, I've played it so many times, I've watched so many groups play it. Every single time it starts, we're going to play it serious, and we're not going to do dungeon crawling. We're going to have a smart game, and within 15 minutes, it's off the rails, and they're in a dungeon being wacky and trying to kill stuff. I sat down at a con. Some game master ran a really, really wonderful story of Dungeon World, and he just kept talking and talking and talking and talking, and there was no time for us to engage. He's describing for a good half an hour this journey we take to this cave, and then
Mhm.
once we get into the cave, we get into a fight with the spider or whatever it was, um, and it just turned into D&D. There was it his story was fantastic. I cannot besmirch his story. It's one of the better fantasy stories I've been in. But at the end of the day, it was still Apocalypse World or PBTA, and we were still rolling dice and
Mhm.
having to do stupid things to justify using a power on our character sheet.
Mm.
And
I
there's
I
very
guess
few games that I think work that take the beat. You and I played Mashed,
Mhm.
and I even know Mark Clemens. I talked to him about it. I said, I really wish you hadn't put this on PBTA because you did so much good work here. You designed such an interesting setting here with so much research, and then we had to use that stupid mechanic. And it works in Apocalypse World, by the way. It works.
Mm-hmm.
in Vincent's original design. It does not work anywhere else. And people continue to hack it and they don't know what they're doing.
Mm.
But you were going to say something. I interrupted. And
Yeah.
that's the least negative I want to get. Well, let's get back to the positive.
Yeah. I think in my case, I've just been lucky enough that my wacky game sessions are the minority.
Right.
And I think it mostly happens in one shots because people are just looking for. Sorry, you got a cough. Sorry, I was not able to mute that one. In one shots, people are just looking for the quick, funny moments. So it's not uncommon for games to get really wacky really quickly, unless you have people who are there for really non-wacky games like Bluebeard's Bride or um, stuff like that. But then, in many of the longer campaigns I've had, thankfully, the groups tend to be less wacky because there's that overall desire to tell a more serious story.
Right.
So the way the write-ups have been interpreted do matter on the perspective of the player.
Yeah.
So, um, like for example, in Dungeon World, there's the dwarf that can talk to stone.
Right.
Um, in a wacky version, you'll have people picking up pebbles and just hi, hello there, rock, and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
But then in the other game I ran, where my partner Rocky was a dwarf who worshipped the god of rock. Of course, the god of rock at that time sadly was Bob because he didn't have a name to use. But he approached it very, very religiously in the sense that he would actually go to a quiet area. He'd sit on the ground barefoot, and then he'd hold the rock and whisper to it, and then
Right.
he'd rub his nail against the rock because the sounds would then turn into words. And I was like, oh, this is brilliant. So I think it just really sometimes is the expectation of the group on how to approach the game and what clicks with the entire group as you play it. Because things do switch really quickly depending on the mood of the entire group.
Yeah, and yeah, I absolutely totally agree. I think with story games, any kind of indie style game, you get out what you put into it. You don't
Yeah.
have to worry about that with D&D because everybody constantly puts all the work on the other side of the screen,
Yeah.
right? It's the game master's job to figure out how my wackiness affects the world. But in a game like Apocalypse World or any of its clones, you're dealing with the residue of your decisions when you roll poorly.
Mm-hmm.
And you're dealing with the backlash for rolling really really well as well. And so we played what's Night Witches for many sessions, and it
Mm-hmm.
got repetitive, and I didn't like the rules for bombing. But the story that we were building and the way that we play, the story in between missions, we were having a great time with it. And because we weren't asking anybody to engage the dice every 5 minutes, it stayed grounded. People didn't have to have these wacky, outlandish events to
Mm-hmm.
tell a story. And anybody can show up and ruin something. I've had guys show up for Protocol, and we're doing a murder mystery game, and they decide to throw zombies into it. And
Mm-hmm.
Protocol Dinner Guests, you know the one. I don't know if you've played it, but you know that I've made it. It's not designed for that. The tone isn't right.
Yeah.
It's an Agatha Christie style murder mystery, and you're supposed to be, oh, now you're on the stairs and you found a clue that wasn't there before, and instead, oh, I'm on the stairs and a zombie comes out of nowhere and eats me. That's
Mm.
that doesn't fit the tone, and so people that want to ruin games are going to do that.
And it's not even a conscious attempt to ruin. Sometimes um, it's the excitement of having a system that invites you to be creative,
Right, right,
but then the creativeness might not mesh with the overall mood. For example, and if you're listening, know that I don't hate you, but I will cite this example. Um, Titus is one of the gamers who I love playing with because he really gets into character. He really loves building the story.
right.
But there have been early games with him that went off the rails, and like
Yeah.
one of them was playing your brilliant game. Oh my gosh,
I don't have any
Tyrion,
brilliant
like
games, so I don't know what you're talking about.
Storm Gods, the Praxis game Gods
King of
Storm.
Storms.
Yes, there. Oh my gosh, I was imagining the pictures, the cover. I couldn't
Right.
remember the. Anyway, so we were playing that, and we were having a fantastic game where it felt like American Gods meets The Endless um meets Imagica, and each of us were different deities. Because we sort of our game sort of went, since we were the children of the gods, we've sort of become the gods since the old gods are gone, and with the threat of the titans coming, many of us were talking about whether or not we should do this and that. And near the end, as we were nearing the climax of the story, Titus decided to make the twist: a different god appears, and it threw us all out in a loop because it suddenly made us irrelevant. But
Right.
he thought it was a good surprise moment that there's actually another god in the shadows who's been doing all this. So it wasn't necessarily bad in the sense of a story flow, but it felt weird for the players because suddenly, oh, so none of us really had to matter because that god was there anyway.
Right.
And it's that sort of thing which I guess you only really learn through play, that oh, okay, just because I have the freedom to throw in the elements, I have to make sure I'm thinking of how they can connect with the other players as well.
Right. Right.
So
He,
in lots of future games, he's been excellent. But there were some moments like that which like, okay, so that's where the story suddenly went. But we still go for it. It's just that
what
afterwards we tend to talk about the game after, and I was like, Titus, I kind of got lost at that part, and he was like,
Yeah.
yeah, I realized as I was telling it that I made you all useless.
If that had been the ending, that's a great ending, right? If that's the final scene of the game, who cares?
Yes.
You weren't going to get any more scenes anyway.
Exactly.
But
And I think that's
that's a
a
horrible plot twist in the middle of a game about power.
mhm. So it's something you learn to play, and
Yeah.
for many who are new to games that invite you to be creative with the narrative, um, the default is humor because that's the comfort zone. Even if it, if it fucks up, it's still funny, so people will not mind. Whereas, um, if people get used to it and they start injecting stories, it's because they get a better feel for things. And I've seen that happen a lot with new groups that are all about um, they're not comfortable, so they'll throw a joke, or they're not comfortable, they'll make a funny scene,
Right.
or worse, they'll say, "I'll stay quiet and watch." But later on, as they get more comfortable, their earlier moments will be humorous. They'll throw a joke about someone, they'll insult someone in the game, and then it's only later on that they start getting more used to having narrative control, that they can now mention or ask like, oh, can it be raining, because my character would like to now dance in the rain and talk about this and that, about druids love the rain because it makes everyone feel like plants. And so it's still humorous, but you can see that there's more effort now to make it relatable to the world of the game.
I was playing at a convention once with two friends, and they didn't know each other before the game. There was
Mm-hmm.
other people at the table, but these two kept butting heads. And I'm able to game with either one of them, one on one or another group. But I didn't realize that when they got together, they were going to butt heads. And the one guy, I let me see if I remember each other guy's name. One guy was Steve, and Steve was the kind of guy that would just step on everybody's lines if he was in a scene with them. And the other guy was Weston, and Weston was one of those guys that would wait his turn, and he was respectful at the table. So he kept framing scenes with himself and Steve. So Weston keeps putting scenes together, and Steve keeps stepping on all of his lines when he's talking because Steve's trying to create this dramatic tension with the two of them. And Weston would get sick of it, and he would just end the scenes. And then he would frame another scene with that character for some stupid reason. And he did it 3 times. And eventually he just throws up his hands and he walks away from the table, and we had to finish without him. And afterwards he came to me and he said, da, 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 da. And I turned to him and I said, why did you keep putting him in scenes? If he was a jerk to you, if he was mistreating you, why did you do it 3 times? And that's when he realized, oh, yeah, I shouldn't have kept putting. But he was my foil. I was supposed to. No, you weren't supposed to do anything. He's there to make your life miserable. This was Carcass, by the way,
Mm-hmm.
that we were playing. I said, that's his job, is to make life difficult for you from an authoritative standpoint. And since you're putting him in the scene, now you've given him twice the power. I would never have done that. I would have never put that. And you, if you know game systems, oh, this guy's an idiot. I don't want him having any drama points at the end of the game in this protocol. I'm just going to keep putting him in interludes every time I draw an interlude. And now he can add story in the middle, but he can't affect the end. And so you have to figure out who's at the table as well and what they're bringing. And if they're not bringing
Yeah.
anything, you've got to find ways to limit the damage they can do to the story.
And then I guess it helps that now with the, I'm not sure if it's like a new renaissance or what, but there is um, the approach of having safety tools to help mitigate the fact that there are many of us who do play with strangers.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to read each other from an early area. So, like I love how in online play you could shoot messages in Discord while the game is running. We're in. Is that okay? Am I going too far? So the player can still quietly respond while still running the session. And then in face-to-face play, there's the X card or tone boards wherein the player can just point if it's keep going or tone down, and it's all nice that there are these things that help. At first, admittedly, I wasn't sure. I was coming from the camp that table safety is what works for the table is what works for the table, but it was later on I realized that not everyone is capable of communicating that moment. So sometimes more indirect ways do help.
Right.
Ay, sorry, I'm
I
talking.
agree. I use the X card when I play. It from a philosophical standpoint, it doesn't match who I am as a player or game master. But when I'm playing with strangers, I understand their need for it, so I'm happy to use it.
Yeah.
What I don't like is that I need a 90-minute speech before the game at a convention by the people running the convention, telling people, make sure you check in, make sure you're taking breaks, make sure that your triggers are not affecting da da da. And it goes on for so long that whatever passion I had for this session that's coming up, it's gone now, right? And I'm not exaggerating when I say 90 minutes. They'll be up there for 20 minutes, and then everybody has to go up there and pitch their game that they want to run for that 4-hour slot. The first 90 minutes of your 4-hour slot is eaten up by pomp and circumstance, and this happens 3 times a day. And I actually said something to the organizer, John Powell. He's a friend of mine. Afterwards, I said, "You ate up 6 hours of my convention this weekend with the same speech over and over again. How dumb do you think we are that we can't come to a convention and just respect each other? You shouldn't be inviting people." And the convention is only 200 people, right? So he can easily just say, that guy was an asshole last con. I'm not bringing him back. But the rest of us have to do the work of, oh my God, okay, we get it. Some people have triggers. We're all going to be nice at the table. Just say that.
Yeah, I think we're
Now I'm
in the
ranting again. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I think we're just in the early phases of finding ways to incorporate safety better.
I think
Uh,
we're overcompensating right now. And
yeah,
it's
I agree that, well, not, how do I phrase this?
phrase it any way you want
I
to.
keep thinking it's I keep thinking it's similar to seatbelts in cars, right?
Sure.
When seatbelts were first introduced, a lot of people were like, "Is that necessary? Who will really do that? I hate it. It's choking me and all this and that."
Right.
Um, but later on, seatbelts just became the standard, and it's
Sure.
hard to find a car without a seatbelt. But then it reaches a point wherein um, people are taught to use seatbelts as a norm, so you don't have to be told to wear it when you step into the car,
Right.
because you're now being the idiot for not using it when you're in the car. And it's sort of that we're still in the phase of making sure people are aware of the need for safety. Eventually, we'll reach a point where it becomes innately understood that games must be safe. And the tools are there. We don't need to talk about them because even before the game, we're already aware of them. So I think it's that sort of a it's
I
that
think
sort of transition we're going through.
I agree 100% with what you're saying. I'm not discounting. I think the problem is the pendulum used to be in the other direction, where
Hmm.
gaming was freedom. And if you wanted your character to sexually assault another character, there was nothing to protect the players from that. And people enjoyed that libertarian like freedom to do
Hmm.
whatever they want. I'm going to go just kill goblins. I'm just going to go kill the bartender.
Hmm.
And they wanted that freedom because there were so many regulations in their day to day lives. And those people are reacting the hardest to all these new tools. I'm reacting to the tools because the tools treat me like an idiot.
Yeah.
I'm I'm not the kind of person that would ever do any of that to people. And I have a ton of stories about people getting mad because I gave their characters interesting stories, but they felt I didn't like you were giving me damage every morning. Okay, well, you're cursed right now. What do you want? But they didn't even want those kind of stories. So those are the kind of people I don't play with anymore. But
Mm-hmm.
when I sit down with a group, and I will, before I do a story that's really outlandish, say, are you okay with the idea that your character's fallen in love with me because I want to do this thing? And that just takes a second to do that before you proceed, as opposed to having a 90-minute conversation before the game about how the X card works and how the veil works. And
Mm-hmm.
these tools are in place because 99% of the population is dumb. And I don't want to be cast into that environment. And that's why I struggle with it. I'm not saying that it's wrong. And everything you said is absolutely correct. We'll get used to it and we won't need it anymore. But when I game with my friends who are over a certain age, we never have to touch the X card. We never deal with it. It's there, but we never use it.
Yeah, I had that viewpoint as well for quite some time. But then, ever since my fainting spell, um, not magic, not Dungeons and Dragons, but I actually fainted.
Mm-hmm.
This was actually at Obar of all places. I was with friends.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, we were having a night out, and totally ungaming related. One of our mutual friends was with us, and she started to share that she recently had a medical procedure, which is
Oh Lord.
common talk for us. We love
Yeah.
talking about what we've gone through in our lives, and many of us don't talk for like months at times because of work. And normally I wouldn't mind, but surprisingly that night I realized I started to feel a cold sweat,
Right.
and I started to feel pins and needles, and I realized, wait, I know this feeling. This is what happens when I faint. So I told them, change topic, and they looked at me. Um, I guess they didn't hear me because it was a bar. It was loud.
Yeah.
So she continued telling the story.
Oh wow.
And the next thing I know, I was yelling at my best friend, Flip, I'm falling, I'm falling. And then that's it. The next thing I remember, or the next time I'm aware of, sorry, is that he's saying my name over and over again. I'm pushed against the wall because they had to carry me to the side.
Mm-hmm.
Because I blacked out. And
Wow.
worse, and yes, I'm admitting this on the internet for everyone to hear, I found out I pissed myself. So it was a
I'm
full,
laughing because that's so shocking.
yeah, but it was a full blackout, and that
Yeah, that's
me out.
nuts.
And I was like, this is the first time this ever happened. And I
Wow.
realized looking back, um, um, watching over my dad when he was hospitalized some time back, watching over a friend who passed away in the hospital. I guess those left a mark on me that I couldn't handle it.
Wow.
So
That's
with
nuts.
that realization, I am now more conscious that I may have to X card during some games if the topic becomes medical.
Sure. Sure.
And it's weird because it never used to be a problem for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So 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 my that's why I used to be the, oh, with my closer friends I don't really worry about it. But then I realized, wait, I can't anymore even say that.
This is
So,
this is similar but really weird. I don't have anything at the table. I don't have any triggers. I don't have any veils. I don't. There's nothing that you can talk that we talk about at the game that would bother me, that I would need to say let's stop. And I think a lot of that has to do with my feelings on censorship and everything else. But I don't want to put more limitations on the table than are necessary. But if I'm watching television, you could describe a baby being born,
mhm.
but I can't watch a birth scene on TV. You could
Yes,
have your character getting jabbed by a needle, but I can't watch it on television.
yes, same.
Uh, And
Um,
so
I
for
realized, I
me,
think for me, yeah, sorry, go on.
no, I was just
Sorry.
going to say, for me, the description of it and the process of talking about it, it might be squeamish, right? I don't really want to hear about my friend's last menstrual cycle, but she
Mhm.
tells me about it anyway. And I go, okay, all right, I'll listen, but I won't get squeamish. But I'll bet if it was on television, it would just throw me for a loop.
So for me, what I think I made sense of my incident now is, as long as it's fiction, I'm fine. But the
Right.
moment it's something I know to have really happened and I'm made to visualize it, I have trouble.
Right.
So, um, characters describing disembowelment and all this and that, I'm fine, nothing happens. But
Yeah.
then a friend, for example, mentioning, "Oh, I had a splinter and I had wait, stop, stop, stop,"
Yeah.
and that's what I realized. The weird place I'm in now, which I never had for years. I used to watch all these horror stories and stuff, and gore fest. I love it. But now, the moment the scene is possibly real enough, I can't take it. I have to stop watching. To
Yeah.
it, change that I think comes with encounters you've had in real life. I don't know, but in a